My name is Quinn Avery. I'm 63 years old, and until a few months ago, I was the proud owner of a small 2-story house on the edge of Ashbrook. I used to run a bookkeeping service from my dining table, the same table where my son Brady once did his high school homework. Now I live in a motel room that smells faintly of detergent and rain. Room 7, Blue Lantern Inn. A kettle, 2 chipped mugs, 1 drawer that sticks when I close it. That's all I own now. And I thought the story ended there, that life had decided it was time for me to fade quietly. Then the envelope came. If you're listening to this, don't go anywhere. What was inside that envelope changed everything I believed about family, forgiveness, and justice. It's a story that might make you angry, might make you cry, but maybe, just maybe, it will remind you that it's never too late to start again. The morning it happened, the sky was the color of cold metal. I'd just finished boiling water for instant coffee when I heard a soft knock, followed by the shuffle of slippers. Rita, the landlord, stood outside with her cardigan half-buttoned and her hair tied up with a pencil. She looked around the corridor before handing me something thin and beige. "Someone left this for you," she said quietly, her voice half lost in the hum of the vending machine. My name was written in blue ink across the front. The handwriting was careful, almost old-fashioned, the kind that belonged to another time. I thanked her, and she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. When I closed the door, the room felt smaller, as if the air itself was waiting for my reaction. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope. My fingers hesitated on the flap. There was no return address, no postmark, just my name. Quinn. I don't know how long I stared before I opened it. Inside was a thick stack of bills, $50 notes, crisp and new. I counted quickly, then stopped halfway, my hands trembling. $50,000. And beneath the cash, folded once, was a small note. I unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and dust. 4 short sentences stared back at me. "Mom, this is just the beginning. Don't give up yet." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The handwriting looked like Brady's, but there was something different about it. Rounder, softer, almost deliberate. My son hadn't called me Mom in months. The last time we spoke, he'd looked me straight in the eye and told me to leave my own house. "You'll be fine at a motel," he'd said, voice steady, as if he were doing me a favor. "The guest room's ours now. You can sleep in the garage if you really want to stay." His wife, Cass, stood beside him, arms folded, pretending to agree out of politeness. I'd packed 2 suitcases that day and walked out. Now here I was, staring at a note signed with a word that felt like both a wound and a promise. I looked around the motel room, the humming air conditioner, the single lamp, the faint reflection of my face in the TV screen, and for the first time in months, something inside me shifted. I reached for the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small silver locket. It had belonged to my Aunt Rowena, the woman who raised me after my mother died. Inside was a photo of her smiling in a sunflower field, her hair caught by the wind. Rowena had always believed that truth had its own timing, that justice didn't disappear. It just waited for the right eyes to find it. Before she passed, she told me she was keeping records, though I never knew what she meant. The moment I saw that note, I thought of her handwriting, her careful loops and flourishes. The letters on the envelope looked almost identical. Rita's footsteps faded down the hall. I placed the envelope on the table and stared at it again, my coffee untouched. I thought about Brady, the boy who once begged me to read him stories before bed, who'd promised at his father's funeral that he'd take care of me. How had that promise turned into eviction papers and a lawyer's handshake? The motel's clock ticked loudly. I reached for the envelope again, this time noticing something I'd missed before. On the back of the note, faint pencil marks, almost invisible unless the light hit them right. A short line of numbers, maybe an address, maybe coordinates. My pulse quickened. The handwriting there wasn't Brady's. It was Rowena's. I was sure of it. I pressed the note flat against the table and traced the numbers with my finger. Part of me wanted to believe it was some cruel trick, a leftover scrap from another life. But another part, the one that still clung to hope, knew that Rowena had left messages for a reason. Maybe she had seen what was coming long before I did. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, shaking the window. The world kept moving, unaware that a woman in room 7 was trying to piece together the meaning of $50,000 and a cryptic message. I slipped the money back into the envelope, folded the note, and tucked both inside the drawer with the locket. Then I sat quietly, hands on my knees, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The silence pressed against my ears until I finally whispered to the empty room, "What do you want me to do with this, Brady? Or is it you, Aunt Rowena?" No one answered, but for the first time since losing everything, I didn't feel entirely alone. There was a direction hidden in those words, a thread I could follow. And I knew deep down that whoever sent that envelope wasn't done with me yet. When people talk about losing everything, they usually mean money or maybe property. But what I lost went deeper than that. It was trust. It was belonging. It was the quiet certainty that my own son would never use the law to take my home. Before it all unraveled, my life was simple. Mornings smelled of coffee and lemon polish. I'd open the curtains of the old house on Maple Drive and watch the sunlight creep across the kitchen counter. There were framed photos on the wall. Brady's graduation, my late husband Henry smiling by the car he rebuilt himself, and one picture of me, younger, standing beside my Aunt Rowena in front of her old brick office. That house wasn't just a building. It was history, laughter, Sunday dinners, and grief all layered into the walls. Brady used to visit every week back then. He'd bring groceries, sometimes fix the gutters, talk about business ideas that never quite worked. I knew he struggled, but I never pressed. I believed he'd find his way. Then one morning, his tone changed. He started talking about investments, about how much equity the house carried, how it might help both of us if he handled things. At first I laughed, thinking it was one of his usual big plans. But then he brought papers, thick legal ones with fine print and highlighted sections. "Just a trust, Mom," he said. "It'll protect you, make things easier if anything happens." I didn't sign that day. Something in his voice made me stall. But a week later, Cass came by with coffee and kindness in her voice, the kind that feels rehearsed. She mentioned they were going through a rough patch, that Brady was under pressure, that they might need to use the house temporarily for refinancing. I wanted to help. He was my son. You don't imagine your own child will weaponize your trust against you. A few months later, I noticed envelopes from banks piling up in the mail slot. Brady handled them before I could look. He said they were updates. Then came the call from my insurance agent, asking about the title transfer I'd apparently approved. I remember the cold that spread through my chest as I told him I hadn't signed anything. The next day, Brady showed up with Elliot Granger, his lawyer. They smiled too much. "It's just paperwork cleanup," Elliot said, tapping his pen. "Your signature was included when the trust was filed. We're just formalizing it." My hand shook as I looked at the forms. My name was there, but the date was wrong. I could still see the faint smudge where a signature had been traced. "This isn't mine," I said quietly. Elliot smiled as if I'd made a small joke. "Ma'am, everything's been reviewed by the court. Judge Hale already approved the transfer. It's a done deal." I looked at Brady, hoping to find some sign of regret, but his face was stiff, pale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's better this way, Mom," he said softly. "You'll still have a place here. Just not ownership. It's all technical." I felt something inside me crack. He used the word technical as though love could be converted into clauses and signatures. The next few weeks blurred. Meetings, documents, a courthouse I'd never stepped inside before. I remember standing before Judge Hale, my own attorney, silent beside me, as Elliot argued that my transfer was voluntary. My lawyer whispered that fighting further would cost more than I could afford. The judge nodded, indifferent. With one strike of a gavel, 40 years of my life disappeared into legal ink. When I returned home that afternoon, Cass's car was already parked in the driveway. Boxes lined the hallway. My bedroom door was half open. She looked startled when she saw me. "We thought you'd want to pack what you need," she said quietly. "Brady's at work." It was raining when I left. I didn't take much. 2 suitcases, my locket, a photo of Henry, and a few ledgers from my business. I locked the door behind me, even though it wasn't mine anymore. The next days passed in silence. Martha Lee, my neighbor, came by once. She tried to say she was sorry, but she couldn't look at me for long. People distance themselves from pain they can't explain. She left a basket of muffins at the motel front desk and never came again. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the hum of the vending machine and the traffic outside. I'd replay every conversation with Brady, searching for the moment I should have seen it coming. Maybe it was when he stopped saying "Mom" and started calling me Quinn. Maybe it was when Cass began referring to the house as the property. Small words that built a wall between us brick by brick. Still, I couldn't hate him. Not completely. I thought about the boy who used to bring me seashells from the lake, who cried when his father's car broke down and begged me not to sell it. I thought about the day he promised he'd always protect me. Maybe that's why it hurt so deeply. Because betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those who know where your heart is buried. After the court ruling, I withdrew what little I had left from my savings. I asked the motel manager if there were any long-term rates. She looked at me for a moment before nodding. "Room 7's available. Monthly discount if you pay cash." And that's where I've been ever since. Watching strangers come and go, listening to the walls breathe, trying not to remember the sound of my own footsteps in the hallway of the house that used to be mine. When I received that envelope the other morning, I didn't just see money and a note. I saw a door cracked open. A reason to look backward. Not in grief this time, but in search of something Rowena once told me. Truth hides in the quietest corners. I think that's where I'm headed next. The morning of the final hearing was gray and bitterly cold, the kind of day when even the sky seemed unwilling to look anyone in the eye. I remember sitting outside the courtroom, clutching a folder of documents I didn't fully understand, the paper edges soft from how many times I'd held them. My attorney, a man appointed by the court after I could no longer afford my own, barely glanced up from his phone. He'd already told me not to expect much. "Judges like Hale rarely reverse property rulings," he'd said. I nodded, even though I didn't really hear him. When the bailiff opened the door, the sound of shuffling shoes echoed like a warning. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and disinfectant. Brady sat at the plaintiff's table with Elliot Granger, both in tailored suits. My son looked thinner, but his expression was carved from stone. He didn't turn to see me enter. Cass sat behind him, her posture straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked like she wanted to disappear. The judge read through the case summary as if it were a grocery list. "All documents appear in order," he said, adjusting his glasses. My lawyer made a brief argument about forgery, about how my signature had been replicated from older records. Elliot countered with polished confidence, presenting confirming witnesses and notarized affidavits I'd never seen. One of them was a clerk from the county registry, swearing that the transaction had been processed according to protocol. When the gavel struck the first time, it sounded like thunder. The ruling was upheld. The house was no longer mine, legally, permanently, irreversibly gone. I didn't cry there. I waited until I stepped outside, where the courthouse steps blurred into streaks of rain. People passed by without looking. I heard someone from Brady's team laugh near the parking lot, and that laughter followed me all the way down the street. The next few days were a blur of humiliation. My bank accounts were frozen for review. The small business license I'd maintained for my bookkeeping work expired, and renewal was denied because the address was no longer valid. I went from respected local accountant to motel tenant in less than a month. The people who used to greet me at the market looked away now. Some whispered. Others avoided eye contact altogether. It wasn't cruelty. Not really. It was discomfort. No one wants to be reminded that stability can vanish overnight. Martha Lee brought soup once, left it at my door, then stopped coming. Even the church stopped sending newsletters after I couldn't contribute anymore. I tried to fight. I filed a formal complaint about the forged documents, but the clerk told me the matter was closed. I asked to speak to Judge Hale's assistant, but she said the schedule was full for the next 6 months. I left a message anyway. No one called back. One evening, I sat at the motel's small desk, staring at the letterhead from the court. The seal at the top looked official and final, like a door bolted shut. I began writing a note to Brady. Something, anything, to make sense of it all. I started with, "I forgive you," but couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt false, heavy. I crumpled the page and threw it away. Rita knocked that night, holding a tray with soup and bread. "Rough day?" she asked Gitiki gently. I nodded. She didn't ask for details. Instead, she placed the tray on the table and said, "The thing about people like them is, they think taking everything means they've won. But they never think about what happens when someone has nothing left to lose." Then she left, her steps fading into the hall. I didn't know it yet, but her words would come back to me later, when the first clue appeared, when the fight truly began. A week after the ruling, I walked past the courthouse again to collect a certified copy of the judgment for my records. The same clerk was at the counter, smiling faintly as she printed my paperwork. As she handed it over, a small slip of paper caught my eye. It had fallen from her folder, an invoice from a private law office with Elliot Granger's name on it, a payment for expedited registry service. The date matched the week before my ruling. She noticed me looking and quickly tucked it back into her stack, pretending nothing happened. I didn't say a word, but the seed was planted. That night in my motel room, I pulled out every document I'd saved. Copies, emails, text messages. I traced every date, every signature. Some lines didn't match. Small differences, like tiny cracks in a wall. I began writing notes in a spiral notebook, marking names and dates, connecting them like Rowena used to do when she investigated local cases. I remembered how she once told me, "Corruption never walks alone. It always leaves footprints." But the next morning, all the clarity vanished again when I saw my reflection in the motel mirror. My eyes looked older, tired, as if time itself had gained weight. I asked myself whether it was worth it to fight, whether a 63-year-old woman could stand against lawyers, judges, and her own son. Still, something inside refused to go quiet. When I saw Rita later that day, sweeping near the vending machine, I asked her how long she'd been managing the place. She shrugged. "Long enough to know people check in when they've lost more than luggage." I smiled weakly, not sure what to say. She tilted her head toward my room. "You keep looking out the window like you're waiting for something. Maybe it's already waiting for you." That night, I didn't sleep much. Rain tapped against the window, steady as a heartbeat. The courthouse, the laughter, the silence, they all played in loops in my mind. When dawn came, the world outside glowed pale blue, and I decided that if fate wasn't finished with me yet, I'd at least meet it halfway. I didn't know how or when, but something was going to change. The days at the Blue Lantern Inn began to melt together, each one carrying the same quiet rhythm. I'd wake to the hum of the vending machine outside my door, the faint buzz of a neon sign that flickered through the curtains, and the smell of detergent rising from the hallway. The motel was old but clean. The carpets had seen too many storms, and the wallpaper, peeled slightly near the corners, but it had something my old house no longer had: peace, even if it was borrowed. Every morning, I brewed coffee in a chipped white kettle that belonged to someone before me. I'd pour it slowly, savoring the sound, pretending it was still my kitchen back on Maple Drive. Then I'd sit by the small window, notebook open, and watch the street below. I started doing small freelance work again, balancing spreadsheets for a nearby church fundraiser, cataloging receipts for a bakery owner who didn't trust computers. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest. It filled the hours and gave me back a sliver of purpose. Sometimes, between calls, I talked to Martha Lee, who rented the room across the hall. She was a retired nurse who'd moved into the inn after her husband's stroke left her with bills she couldn't pay. She had kind eyes and the habit of leaving small gifts at my door: an orange, a crossword puzzle, a folded piece of scripture. "Keeps the loneliness away," she said once, shrugging. We didn't talk much about the past. People at the Blue Lantern rarely did. Everyone there had something they were trying to outrun. Ray Coleman lived 2 doors down, a truck driver, built like an oak tree, always smelling faintly of diesel and peppermint. He'd nod whenever we crossed paths, sometimes leaving half a sandwich wrapped in foil outside my door before heading back on the road. "Too much for one man," he'd write on a sticky note. "You'll do me a favor if you take it." It was his way of being kind without asking questions. But Rita Monroe, the landlord, remained the quiet center of that place. She was always around, watering the dusty plants by the front office, changing light bulbs, repairing locks. She never asked for rent receipts. She kept a spiral notebook in her pocket, and I sometimes caught her writing names in it. The way she looked at me after handing me that envelope still haunted me. There was something she wasn't saying, but I didn't push. Not yet. The envelope itself was hidden now, tucked in a small cavity behind the dresser. I'd taken off the backboard and slid it between the wall studs, wrapped in a plastic sleeve. Every few nights, I'd take it out just to touch it, to remind myself it was real. $50,000 and a note that refused to explain itself. Each time I read the words, "Mom, this is just the beginning," I felt a mix of hope and dread. One afternoon, after finishing a batch of receipts for the bakery, I went for a walk. The air smelled of asphalt and fried food from the diner next door. A man played guitar by the bus stop, his notes drifting softly across the parking lot. For a moment, I forgot everything. I just listened. When I returned to my room, there was something new beneath my door. A small folded piece of paper. No envelope this time. It said, "Stop asking questions." No signature. The handwriting was printed, all uppercase, the kind used by someone trying not to be recognized. My heart thudded hard enough that I had to sit down. I looked around the room, half expecting to see a shadow move. Through the thin curtains, I could make out the parking lot. 2 cars, 1 truck, the same as before. Nothing looked different, but I could feel the change in the air. I showed the note to Rita that evening when she made her rounds. She frowned, reading it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "Probably some idiot from out of town," she said. "Happens sometimes. Don't worry about it." But her tone said otherwise. Later that night, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate. I held my breath, watching the thin line of light under the frame. The steps stopped, then moved on. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open, then shut. When I finally exhaled, I realized my hands were shaking. The next morning, I tried to act as if nothing happened. I took my coffee to the courtyard, where Martha was feeding crumbs to a stray cat. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I forced a smile. "Just a bad dream," I replied. She didn't believe me, but didn't press either. Instead, she handed me a small lavender sachet. "Helps with sleep. You'll need it." As the days passed, I grew more alert, more watchful. I noticed small things. The same gray sedan parked near the entrance every few nights. A man in sunglasses pretending to read a newspaper at the diner. The way the payphone near the vending machine always seemed to have the receiver slightly off the hook. I began to wonder if the envelope had brought more than money, if it had brought danger. Still, something in me had changed. I wasn't the woman who walked out of that courtroom with empty hands anymore. I'd begun keeping notes again, small observations written in the margins of my notebook. License plates, times, faces. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I felt Rowena's presence in every detail. She used to say that secrets always start as small patterns people ignore. Maybe this was one of them. One evening, as I was closing my laptop, the motel phone rang. It startled me so much that I almost dropped my cup. I answered, expecting Martha or Rita. Instead, a man's voice, flat, low, distorted slightly, as if filtered through an old machine, said, "Stop digging, Mrs. Avery. It's safer that way." Then the line went dead. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the receiver. The hum of the dial tone filled the room like static, a reminder that someone out there knew my name, my room, my story. That night, I pulled the envelope out of its hiding place and held it against my chest. I didn't know whether it was a gift or a warning, but I made a quiet promise to myself. Whoever wanted me to stop asking questions was going to be disappointed. The night after the phone call, I didn't sleep. The motel's air conditioner clicked on and off like a metronome, marking each minute I spent staring at the ceiling. I thought about leaving, packing up, driving until the map turned unfamiliar. But the envelope sat on the dresser, waiting, silent and heavy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rowena's handwriting, the faint pencil marks on the back of the note that looked like coordinates. I could almost hear her voice saying what she used to whenever I hesitated. Courage doesn't always roar, Quinn. Sometimes it just whispers, "Stay." At dawn, I made coffee. Though my hands trembled too much to pour cleanly, the world outside was quiet, still gray from the night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope one last time before I pulled the note out again. Those numbers. It wasn't a random code. I compared them to an address written in one of Rowena's old business cards I'd kept inside my wallet. It matched. Her old storage property on the outskirts of Milford, near the edge of the industrial zone. A place she'd once called her archive. That was it. The moment my heart stopped weighing fear against curiosity. I decided I wouldn't run anymore. If the truth was sitting in that old shed, I'd find it. And if whoever was watching me didn't want that, then they could watch me walk straight into it. I packed a small bag, a flashlight, the motel receipt I'd been keeping like a talisman, my locket, and just enough cash from the envelope for gas. As I zipped the bag, I heard a knock. Rita stood in the doorway, holding a stack of clean towels. She looked at the bag, then at me. "You heading somewhere?" "Just for a drive," I said. She studied me for a moment, eyes sharp behind her calm. "Drive safe," she said finally. "And keep your lights on, even during the day." Something in her tone told me she knew more than she was willing to say. I slipped out quietly, past the office where the neon sign flickered against the window. The Blue Lantern's parking lot gleamed wet from early rain. My old sedan started with a groan, the kind that sounds like it's thinking twice. I drove south, the road empty, my reflection flickering faintly in the rearview mirror. For the first time in months, I felt alive. Not happy, not safe, but awake. The coordinates led me through the edge of town and down a narrow gravel road. On either side, empty lots stretched out, filled with rusting trucks and weeds that reached the windows. I passed an old gas station, boarded up and leaning. A sign half fallen from its post read, "Milford Industrial Park." I hadn't been there in years, not since Rowena used to store old boxes from her office in one of the rented sheds. The address matched a small lot near the end of the road. The gate was chained, but the lock was rusted enough to break with a twist of a tire iron I found in the trunk. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked toward a small, faded blue shed. The paint peeled like dried skin. A metal tag near the handle read Unit 12B. When I touched the door, a chill ran through me. It wasn't fear exactly, it was recognition. Rowena had always been methodical, precise. If she left anything behind, it was because she wanted someone, someday, to find it. The padlock was stubborn, but the hinge gave with a groan. The air inside smelled of dust, metal, and old paper. Sunlight slipped through a cracked vent, illuminating floating specks like slow-moving ghosts. Boxes lined the walls, labeled in her familiar handwriting. Invoices. Research. Helios. Personal. Helios. I froze at the sight of that word. I pulled one box toward the light and opened it. Inside were folders, receipts, printed emails. I flipped through them quickly. Financial ledgers, reports, names I didn't recognize. Each one carried the same letterhead, Helios Biotech Corporation. At the bottom of one report, I found a photo clipped to the page. It was Brady, my son, standing beside a group of executives, smiling at a corporate retreat. The date printed at the corner was 2 years earlier, long before he'd ever told me about Helios. My stomach tightened. He hadn't stumbled into them by accident. He'd been involved long before the house, before the betrayal. Maybe Rowena had known. Maybe she'd tried to warn me. I searched further, my fingers leaving streaks in the dust. In one small tin box near the back, wrapped in cloth, I found something familiar, a locket identical to mine, only older. When I opened it, There was a picture of my mother, Rowena's sister, smiling, her hand resting on a young Rowena's shoulder. On the inside of the lid, etched faintly, were the words, "Finish what we started." The air seemed to hold its breath around me. I sat down on an overturned crate, staring at that message until my eyes blurred. I didn't know what exactly Rowena had started, but I knew now it had everything to do with Helios, with Brady, with whatever this hidden chain of money and silence was built on. The shed creaked softly as a breeze pushed through the vent. I packed the documents carefully into my bag, replaced the lock as best I could, and walked back toward the car. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have gone there." No punctuation, no signature. For a long moment, I stood beside my car, the wind tugging at my hair, the locket warm in my palm. I thought of running again, of driving until the sun disappeared behind another state line. But I didn't. I slid into the driver's seat, looked at the horizon, and whispered, "I'm not done yet." For the first time in months, I had a direction, and for the first time in years, I felt Rowena's hand on my shoulder again. The next morning, I drove back to Milford before sunrise. The roads were empty except for the occasional truck hauling freight toward the industrial district. Fog hung low over the fields, softening everything it touched. My hands were cold on the steering wheel, but my chest felt strangely calm. I wasn't driving toward fear anymore. I was driving toward truth. When I reached the storage lot, the mist had thinned, revealing the blue shed at the far end like a bruise against the pale horizon. The chain I had broken yesterday still dangled from the gate. It swung slightly in the breeze, creaking in a rhythm that made the whole place feel alive. I parked my car out of sight behind an old delivery van and stepped out. The key from my locket fit the smaller padlock inside the main latch. I hadn't noticed it the day before, but the moment I slid the key in, the lock clicked open effortlessly. Rowena had left it for me, though I didn't know how she could have planned for this moment. Inside, the air was still and dry. The sunlight filtering through the roof slats fell across the boxes I'd opened before, now neatly repacked. I closed the door behind me, feeling the faint weight of silence press against my ears. There were more boxes deeper inside, stacked with her usual precision. Each one had labels in her steady handwriting, dates, case numbers, fragments of names. But one box sat apart from the others. It was unmarked, sealed with brown tape. I set it on a workbench and cut it open with the edge of my car key. Inside was a small portable recorder, a few old cassette tapes wrapped in plastic, and a folder labeled Containment Project. My pulse quickened. I touched the recorder switch, half afraid of what I'd hear. But it worked instantly. The red light flickered to life. Then Rowena's voice filled the room, calm, steady, tired. "If you're hearing this," she said, "then it means the case file survived. It means they didn't find everything." Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "Helios Biotech's formula isn't just flawed, it's lethal. They know it. They've been paying local officials to suppress the deaths. If something happens to me, the ledgers and photos are evidence. Trust no one from the company, especially those under Elliot Granger's legal supervision." There was a pause, then the faint sound of paper shuffling. "Brady Avery has been compromised. He's not aware he's being used. They've classified him as an asset. I can't reach him anymore. I tried." The tape clicked, and the static returned. My chest tightened. She had known everything. I played another tape. Different voices this time. Male, sharp, muffled like a recording from a distance. "Containment must be absolute," one said. "The public doesn't need details," another replied. "What about the woman, Price?" She's already isolated. It's under control. My knees felt weak. They were talking about Rowena, about silencing her. I opened the folder next. Inside were photos. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Newspaper clippings, chemical reports, and one image that stopped me cold. Brady, standing in a Helios conference room, shaking hands with Derek Haynes, the CEO. His smile looked forced, his eyes uncertain, but there was no mistaking him. He was part of this long before I'd realized. Next to the photo was a handwritten note in Rowena's pen. If you find this, finish what we started. Don't trust anyone, not even him until you know. I sank onto a crate, my throat dry. I thought of the boy who once built a birdhouse with his father, who used to promise he'd never let me down. How had he fallen into this? Did he even understand what he was part of? Or had Helios made him into something unrecognizable? The locket around my neck felt heavier. I opened it and stared at the photo inside, the same one I'd seen yesterday, of my mother with Rowena. Under the photo, folded so small it was almost invisible, was a slip of paper I'd never noticed. I pulled it out carefully. On it, in Rowena's familiar script, were 6 words. Truth costs less than silence does. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time since losing everything, I didn't feel helpless. I felt guided, as if Rowena had left me breadcrumbs across years, waiting for me to be brave enough to follow them. I gathered everything, tapes, photos, files, and placed them in a box. As I stepped outside, the fog had lifted entirely. The air smelled faintly of rain and earth. I looked back at the shed, its door slightly ajar, sunlight spilling onto the floor inside. For a moment, it looked almost holy. Then I noticed something else. Footprints. Fresh ones. They led from the gravel to the shed door. Mine overlapped with another set, larger, heavier, pressed deep into the dirt. Someone else had been here, and recently. A surge of unease rose in my chest. I turned toward my car, scanning the lot. The gray sedan I'd seen near the motel was parked by the fence. Empty. Engine cold. I didn't run, but I moved quickly, loading the box into the trunk. I started the car, locking the doors as I pulled onto the main road. In the rearview mirror, the sedan grew smaller until it vanished completely. When I finally reached the highway, I called the only person I still trusted, Rita. My voice shook as I told her where I'd been. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask why. When I finished, she said quietly, "Get back here, Quinn. Don't talk to anyone else. I'll make some calls." Her voice, calm and certain, steadied me. I drove the rest of the way without stopping. And though fear followed close behind me like a shadow, something else had joined it, a fragile sense of purpose. By the time I reached the Blue Lantern Inn, the sun had begun to set. I carried the box into my room, placed it on the table, and exhaled. I didn't know it yet, but everything inside that box would be the beginning of a storm far greater than the one that had taken my house. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. The box sat on the table like a heartbeat, quiet but alive. I kept staring at it, the dim lamp throwing long shadows across the tapes. The motel was still, except for the occasional sound of a car passing on the road outside. I thought of all the nights Rowena must have spent in silence, collecting evidence, knowing someone out there wanted her gone. Maybe that was why she hid everything here, waiting for the day someone would finally listen. I took a deep breath and pressed play on the first tape. Static filled the room, followed by a man's voice. Clear, confident, practiced. "Containment must be maintained," he said. Another voice, lower, responded. "The reports from District 6 are spreading. We need to reframe it before it hits the media. I leaned closer. The recorder balanced on the table. Then a third voice joined. One I didn't recognize at first, until he said something that made my stomach twist. The payout to the Avery intermediary is cleared. Avery, my name. I froze. The voice wasn't Brady's, not exactly, but there was a tone, a rhythm, familiar enough that denial felt useless. My son had been part of this, maybe not at the top, maybe not fully aware, but part of it nonetheless. I pressed pause and sat back, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, that the Avery they mentioned was someone else entirely. But deep down, I knew Rowena wouldn't have kept these tapes if they weren't connected to me. I played the next one. The sound of paper rustling, then Rowena's voice again. Calm but strained. If this recording reaches Quinn, she said, please know I tried to stop them. Derek Haynes authorized the distribution despite internal warnings. The deaths in the trial were real, and they buried every report. Brady is in over his head. He's being used, but he doesn't see it yet. Her voice cracked near the end. If they silence me, the files marked Helios 12 will prove the payments. Don't let them destroy it. I pressed my hand against my mouth, tears burning the corners of my eyes. She had known. She had fought alone. I switched to another tape. This one was muffled, as if recorded through a wall. A man, Derek Haynes, I guessed, was speaking. Keep the local judge compliant. The clerk will handle the signatures. The woman can't contest once we secure property control. My heart stopped. The woman. He was talking about me. I stopped the tape and sat in silence, the kind that makes the air heavy. I felt like every breath I took echoed in the tiny room. I glanced at the envelope, still resting near the lamp, and wondered if that, too, had been part of some plan. A test. A warning. But there was one more cassette, smaller and unlabeled. I loaded it in, and Rowena's voice came again, softer this time. Quinn, she said, if you find this, it means they succeeded in taking your home. But they can't take your will. Inside the envelope is enough to start over, but don't waste it running. Use it to fight back. There's someone you can trust. Agent Rosa Delgado, Bureau Liaison. Tell her Rowena's file is complete. She'll understand. She paused. I could hear her breathing, slow and uneven. You always had more courage than you thought. I'm counting on that now. The tape clicked, then stopped. I sat there for a long time, staring at the recorder, the words looping in my head like a heartbeat. Don't waste it running. Use it to fight back. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain began to patter against the motel window, soft at first, then steady. I looked at the locket around my neck, then at the tapes, the folder, the envelope. Each one felt like a piece of something Rowena had built long before I realized I was part of it. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and turned on the desk lamp fully. The reflection in the mirror across the room startled me. I looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, eyes sharper. There was no trace of the woman who'd walked out of that courtroom in silence. I gathered everything, the tapes, the folder, the photos, and placed them neatly back in the box. I'd lost a home, a reputation, a sense of safety, but I hadn't lost my name, and I wasn't about to lose my voice. Before I turned off the light, I called Rita. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft and steady as always. You found something, didn't you? She asked, and yes, I whispered, and I think I know who can help. She didn't ask who. Instead, she said, I'll make sure your car's fueled in the morning. I hung up and sat in the dark, listening to the storm. Lightning flashed outside, bright enough to illuminate the box on the table. I took the note from the envelope and read it again. Mom, this is just the beginning. Maybe it wasn't Brady who sent it. Maybe it was Rowena. Or maybe, just maybe, it was both of them in their own way. A message across years, carried by guilt, love, and unfinished justice. When the rain stopped, the world felt washed clean, ready for something new. Tomorrow, I would drive to the address Rowena had given me. I would find Agent Rosa Delgado. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest glimmer of something I thought I'd buried with my past. Hope. Morning came soft and golden, the kind that tries to make you believe the world can start over. I packed the tapes, photos, and folders into a canvas tote, wrapped the locket around my wrist, and drove toward the address Rowena had mentioned on the recording. It was a small federal office building in the city, the kind people walk past every day without noticing. A plain sign by the door read, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Field Liaison Division. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. A woman in a gray suit stood behind the reception counter, her dark hair tied neatly at the back. "Can I help you?" she asked, hesitated before speaking. "I was told to ask for Agent Rosa Delgado. Tell her Rowena Price sent me." Her expression didn't change, but she picked up the phone and made a short call. Moments later, a woman appeared from the hallway, tall, composed, her badge clipped to her belt. Her voice was even, careful. "You're Quinn Avery?" I nodded. "Come with me." She led me to a small office lined with filing cabinets and a single window. On her desk sat a mug that read, "Justice never sleeps," though the coffee inside looked like it had. She gestured for me to sit. "You have something from Rowena Price?" I placed the tote on the table and began laying everything out. The cassette tapes, the ledger, the printed emails, the photos. Rosa watched silently as I explained everything. The envelope, the shed, the threats, even Brady's involvement. I didn't cry. My voice was steady, almost foreign to my own ears. When I finished, she said quietly, "We've been trying to reopen her case for years, but every lead disappeared. Judges transferred, evidence misplaced. She wasn't paranoid, Mrs. Avery. She was right." She reached for the ledger, flipping through pages. "These transactions match names we've seen before. And your son's signature..." She paused, sighing. "That explains a few things." "Can you stop them?" I asked. She looked up, her eyes sharp. "Not yet. But we can build something solid. I'll need someone to verify this data, and a legal partner who can navigate civil channels. Do you trust anyone who knows your case?" I thought for a moment, then nodded. "There's a lawyer, Harper Cole. He handled small estate cases for my aunt years ago. He's tough, but honest." Rosa wrote his name down. "Good. I'll reach out to him. And I know someone else who can help. A private investigator, Tom Reyes. Ex-cop, knows how to stay invisible." She leaned forward, her tone softer. "You've already done the hardest part, Quinn. You survived long enough to bring this to light." Something in her calm certainty steadied me. For months, I'd been floating through a fog of shame and confusion. But in that moment, I felt my feet touch the ground again. By afternoon, Rosa had arranged a meeting with Tom and Harper at a small diner near the city's edge. Tom arrived first, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen too much. He slid into the booth across from me. "Delgado says you've got real evidence," he said. "Not just rumors?" I opened the folder and showed him a photo. Brady shaking hands with Derek Haynes. Tom studied it, then nodded. That's solid. I can trace movement, follow patterns. You said there were payments? Yes, in the ledger. And there's a tape that mentions a judge and a registry clerk. He smiled faintly. Good. Corruption leaves footprints. We'll find them. A few minutes later, Harper. Cole walked in. Silver hair, clear voice, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He shook my hand firmly. Rowena Price, he said with quiet admiration. That woman was a storm in a suit. If you've got what she left behind, we're not starting from zero. We're starting with leverage. We spent hours outlining everything. Rosa explained what the Bureau could do. Warrants, subpoenas, witness protection if necessary. Harper discussed civil suits and trustee claims, ways to secure the heritage trust Rowena had mentioned in her notes. Tom, meanwhile, planned surveillance routes, places where Brady and his associates might still be meeting. Through it all, I listened, half in awe, half in disbelief. For so long, I'd felt invisible. Now, 3 professionals sat across from me, treating my story as something real, not just a tragic misunderstanding. At one point, Rosa looked up from her notes. Quinn, she said gently, I need you to understand something. Once we move forward, there's no turning back. These people don't forgive exposure. I nodded. Neither do I. That answer seemed to surprise her. Harper smiled slightly, tapping his pen. Good. Then let's make sure the next time they see your name, it's on a court order, not a deed they stole. When the meeting ended, Rosa handed me her card. Keep this number. Don't call from your motel phone. Tom will check the place for surveillance, just in case. On the drive back, I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. The city lights blurred into gold streaks as I replayed everything in my mind. Rowena's voice, the tapes, the faces at the diner. For the first time since losing my home, I wasn't moving backward. Back at the Blue Lantern, Rita was waiting outside my door. She looked at me, then at the tote still clutched in my hand. So, she said softly, you found your people. I think I did. She smiled, stepping aside. Good. You'll need them. As I unlocked the door, I noticed the reflection of my own face in the window. Tired but alive, eyes clearer than before. I placed the tote beside the bed, touched the locket around my wrist, and whispered to the empty room. We're not alone anymore, Rowena. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. Tom Reyes moved like someone who'd learned patience from survival. For the next week, he worked quietly, methodically, mapping out Brady's movements with a precision that almost frightened me. Every morning, he'd send Rosa a brief update, then meet me at the diner near the motel for coffee. He never looked directly at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed on the door or the parking lot, like danger was always 5 seconds away. Your son's been meeting someone, he said one morning, stirring sugar into his coffee without tasting it. Cassandra Price. You know her? I nodded. Cass, his business partner. She's more than that, he said. She's involved with Helios, too. Financial operations, off-books contracts, and she's got ties to that lawyer, Elliot Granger. My heart sank. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made the betrayal heavier. Rosa joined us a few minutes later, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were grainy photos. Brady and Cass sitting together at an outdoor bistro, papers between them. A man I recognized as Elliot Granger arriving soon after. My son looked older, shoulders tight, his eyes darting around. He wasn't at ease. He was trapped. "We're setting up surveillance for their next meeting," Rosa said. "Tom's got the equipment ready. You won't be involved directly. It's safer that way." But I couldn't stay away completely. A part of me needed to see it for myself, to face what he'd become. So I agreed to stay nearby, just outside the cafe district, in Tom's car, listening through the receiver he placed in my lap. The day of the operation, the city was warm, the kind of humid that makes the air shimmer. The bistro sat on a quiet street lined with oaks. Couples walked by, waiters laughed. Life continued as if it wasn't about to witness something that could change everything. Tom's voice came through the earpiece. "They're here. Cass first, then Brady. Elliot's on his way." I glanced at Rosa beside him, her eyes steady on the monitor. The live feed showed Brady and Cass leaning across the table. Cass slid a small envelope toward him. He hesitated before opening it. Inside, something glinted. Maybe a key, maybe a flash drive. Then Elliot arrived, shaking hands like a man performing for the camera. They talked for nearly 30 minutes, their expressions rehearsed. I couldn't hear every word, but enough came through to make my stomach twist. Cass: "The account's been settled. Heritage transfer complete." Elliot: "And the registry file?" Brady: "Handled. The court copies were overwritten. No trace left." No trace left. The words struck like ice. Tom adjusted the zoom. "There. Look at that envelope." Rosa leaned closer. On the corner of the envelope, half hidden by Brady's hand, were faint letters in blue ink. The same careful, looping handwriting as Rowena's. "That's hers," I whispered. "Rowena's handwriting." Rosa nodded, eyes narrowing. "So the funds didn't just vanish. They're moving them through old accounts she once managed. Someone inside Helios still uses her name." The meeting ended abruptly. Elliot handed Cass a pen. She signed a paper, then passed it to Brady. When he hesitated, she whispered something, and he looked away before signing. Tom clicked a button, capturing the moment in high definition. "That's it," Rosa said. "We've got what we need to request warrants." As they left, Brady lingered behind, alone for a few seconds. He rubbed his temples, staring at the envelope as if it burned. His hand. For the first time, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once asked me if good people could still make bad choices. When the feed ended, Tom shut off the monitor. "We'll file the footage through bureau channels. Once verified, we can move for financial subpoenas. This isn't just your son anymore, Quinn. This is systemic." I stared out the window, the bistro now quiet, chairs stacked, waiters sweeping crumbs from the sidewalk. "He looks lost," I said softly. Rosa turned to me. "He is, but lost doesn't mean innocent." That night, back at the motel, I couldn't eat. I sat by the window, the city lights blinking in the distance, thinking of Brady's face when he held that envelope. It wasn't greed anymore. It was fear. Fear of something bigger than either of us. Around midnight, Rita knocked gently. "You've been busy," she said, stepping in without waiting for permission. She set a steaming cup of tea on the table. "Heard from your friends today. Sounds like the truth's waking up." I smiled faintly. "It's messy when it does." "Always is," she said, then quieter. "You remind me of your aunt." I looked up, startled. "You knew Rowena?" Rita nodded, her eyes soft but distant. "A long time ago. She rented space here when she started her first investigation. Brave woman. Didn't know how to quit." The room felt smaller suddenly, the past folding neatly into the present. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Rita's smile didn't reach her eyes. Some things you have to find on your own. Besides, I wasn't sure you were ready. She left before I could ask more. The door clicked softly behind her, leaving the faint smell of peppermint tea in the air. I turned back to the window, watching headlights slide across the wet pavement. The truth was out there now, moving in files and footage, in people who had power to make it matter. But I knew better than to think it would end cleanly. Helios wouldn't stay quiet, and neither would those protecting it. Still, as I lay in bed that night, the recorder resting on the table beside me, I whispered the same words I had whispered to Rowena's photo weeks before. You started this, but I'll finish it. And this time, I meant it. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after Rosa submitted the evidence request. It was a small thing at first, a shattered window on Rita's truck parked outside the Blue Lantern Inn. Nothing was stolen, no fingerprints left behind, just a single note tucked under the wiper blade. Stop digging. The same words I'd seen before. Rita didn't flinch. She picked up the glass with her bare hands, sweeping it into a paper bag. They always think fear works, she said quietly. They don't understand what loss already taught us. I wanted to believe her calm meant we were safe, but the air around the motel began to change. Strangers lingered longer in the parking lot. The payphone receiver, always slightly off the hook, now dangled completely. Even Martha, the kind nurse down the hall, said she'd been followed on her way from the grocery store. That evening, Rosa called to warn me that the Bureau's request had leaked. Helios knows, she said. Their legal team's mobilizing. We're securing warrants, but it'll take time. Stay inside, Quinn. Keep your phone off when you're not talking to me. I promised I would, but I didn't. Because that night, Brady came to see me. It was just after 9 when I heard the knock. 3 short raps, then silence. I opened the door expecting Rita, but it was him. My son, standing in the dim hallway, eyes hollow, rain soaking the shoulders of his coat. He looked older than I remembered, the kind of older that doesn't come from years but from shame. Can I come in? He asked. I hesitated before stepping aside. He walked slowly, his gaze moving across the room like he was seeing ghosts. This place, he murmured. I didn't think you'd actually stay here. I didn't think you'd take everything, I replied softly. He winced. I didn't mean for any of that to happen the way it did. The silence stretched between us. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, head bowed. I stood near the window, arms folded. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said, They're watching me too. I turned. Helios? He nodded. I can't sleep. My phone's tapped. They know about the meeting. Elliot told me to lay low, but I think he's gone underground. Cass says she's scared for her kid. His voice broke. Mom, I didn't know how deep it went. I thought it was just money. Investments. Then I found out what they were hiding. The patients. The trials. Rowena tried to warn me, but I thought she was paranoid. I felt something inside me crack, the faintest mercy mixing with anger. She died trying to stop them, I said. You helped them finish what she couldn't. He shook his head violently. No, I didn't. They threatened to expose me, my debts, the loan fraud, everything. They said they'd ruin Cass, take her license, her kid's school fund. I thought if I played along, I could protect us. But once you start signing their papers, you don't get to stop. His words came out in gasps, like someone confessing to a priest rather than a mother. I didn't send the envelope, he said. But I know who did. It was Rowena's contact, someone in her circle. They wanted you to find the tapes. So they could use me? So you could finish it, he said, voice barely above a whisper. You're the only one who's clean, the only one they didn't touch. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a currency we'd both spent long ago. Still, I could see the fear in his eyes, the genuine, helpless kind that strips a person of pride. I walked to the drawer and pulled out the note, the one that came with the envelope. Then tell me, Brady, what does this mean? This is just the beginning. He looked at it for a long moment, then whispered, It means they're scared. If you found Rowena's files, you've got leverage. That's why they're coming after you now. As if on cue, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the air, the motel's power wavering in the storm. Brady stood quickly, pacing toward the door. You need protection, he said. Tell Rosa. She's the only one who can stop them now. I already did, I said. She's filing charges. Helios won't get away this time. He stopped, turning to me with a look that was half grief, half disbelief. You don't understand. They've buried people for less. Before I could reply, headlights swept across the window. A car idled outside. Brady moved to the curtain, peeking through. His face went pale. That's them, he whispered. Black sedan. Same plates I saw near my apartment. I reached for the phone, but he shook his head. They'll trace it. I'll go. I'll draw them off. Brady. He was already halfway to the door. Then he stopped, his hand on the knob, and looked back at me. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I swear. I thought I could fix it before it got this far. He left before I could answer. The sound of the rain swallowed everything else. I ran to the window, watching as he disappeared into the night. The sedan's headlights following soon after. Minutes later, Rosa called. We intercepted movement near your area, she said quickly. 2 unmarked vehicles. One matches Helios's internal fleet. I'm sending a team. Stay inside. Lock the door. I did as she said, heart pounding so loudly it drowned the storm. When the knock finally came, it was her. Rosa in a raincoat, badge out, 2 agents behind her. She scanned the room, then turned to me. He came, didn't he? I nodded. Good, she said. That means his conscience still works. Let's make sure it doesn't go to waste. They set up temporary protection around the motel, cameras hidden, agents on rotation. Rita brought extra locks and installed them herself. She didn't speak much, just tightened every screw twice. That night, as I sat by the window, the motel humming with quiet vigilance, I thought about Brady's face in the doorway, how guilt and love can live in the same eyes. I didn't know if he'd survive what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't afraid anymore, because fear only works when silence obeys it. The morning after Brady's visit, the motel felt different. The air was still damp from the storm, but it carried a new quiet. Like the pause between lightning and thunder when you know something larger is on its way. I hadn't heard from him since he ran into the night, and though part of me wanted to call, I knew Rosa was right. Every move now had to be careful. Rosa arrived before sunrise, her trench coat dripping with rain. She carried a folder under her arm and a cup of black coffee that smelled stronger than courage. We have traction, she said as soon as she stepped in. One of the files you gave us, Rowena's ledger, listed an account under the Heritage Trust. I traced it to a dormant holding fund in your name. In my name? I asked. She nodded. Rowena set it up 20 years ago, long before any of this. Looks like she used it as a secure channel for whistleblower payouts. The balance is substantial. How substantial? She gave a small smile. $11.5 million. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The room tilted slightly. the hum of the refrigerator fading into a blur. "That can't be real," I said. "She never mentioned anything like that." "She probably couldn't," Rosa replied. "If Helios ever suspected it existed, they'd have buried it. But it's clean, federally insured, fully traceable, and protected under your name as next of kin. You can't withdraw it yet, not until we finish securing the warrants. But it's safe." I sank onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling. Rowena had planned for everything. Even after death, she was still 2 steps ahead. Then Rosa reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "We also found this. It was in one of the encrypted folders labeled Final Record. We couldn't crack it until last night. Joel Winters did the work." "Joel?" "Former Helios accountant," she explained. "He turned whistleblower after the first trial deaths. He's been in protective custody, but when he heard your name, he volunteered. Said Rowena once saved his job." She plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The screen blinked, and a single video file appeared. Rowena final.mp4. My hand shook as I clicked play. The image was grainy but clear enough. Rowena sat at her desk, papers spread around her like wings. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, streaked with silver. She looked tired but determined. "If you're watching this, Quinn," she began, "then they finally did what I feared. Helios is collapsing under its own deceit. The patients they harmed, the towns they poisoned, they'll try to erase it all. But they can't erase you. You are the clean slate. The trust account isn't a gift, it's a weapon. Use it to finish the work." She paused, glancing off screen. "They've already started watching me. The man you need to find is Derek Haynes. He hides behind lawyers, but the real trail runs through Judge Conrad Hale. The payments go through his clerk's registry." My pulse quickened as she held up a ledger, its pages filled with handwritten entries. "This proves it. Hale took bribes. Granger arranged them. Brady—" She faltered, her voice breaking. "He didn't know. I tried to reach him, but they used his debts as leverage. If you ever doubt him, remember, they turned him into what they needed him to be." Her eyes softened, her voice trembling. "If I don't make it out, promise me you'll forgive him one day, not for his sake, but for yours." Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "When you find the tape labeled Containment Alpha, give it to Agent Rosa Delgado. Only her, no one else." The video froze. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching her face on the screen. That faint smile she always wore when she was about to lecture me for doubting myself. Then I closed the laptop and pressed the locket to my chest. "I found it, Aunt Rowena," I whispered. "I found it." Rosa placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll need to move quickly now. This gives us leverage for warrants against Haynes, Granger, and Hale. I'll brief Harper and Joel tonight." By evening, the motel room had turned into a makeshift operations hub. Harper arrived in his usual gray suit, unbothered by the chaos. Joel came with 2 laptops and a thumb drive full of decoded financial data. Rita brought sandwiches and quietly stood guard by the door, pretending to tidy but listening to every word. Joel spoke first, his voice low but steady. I confirmed Rowena's ledger. Every payment leads to Hale's office. He signed off on at least 9 fraudulent property transfers, including yours. He received direct wire transfers from Helios's offshore accounts. Harper adjusted his glasses. That's enough for both federal and civil filings. Once the warrants go through, we can freeze assets, reopen rulings, and demand restitution. Rosa nodded. And the video gives us motive and intent. Haynes won't survive this in court. They talked in precise terms: subpoenas, custody chains, court filings. But all I heard was one thing: Rowena won. Before leaving, Joel handed me a sealed envelope. She left this message encrypted within the video. Only you were authorized to open it. When they were gone, I sat alone under the soft light of the lamp and opened the envelope. Inside was a small piece of paper with Rowena's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye. I'm proud of you, Quinn. The truth is slow, but it always finds its way home. The words blurred through my tears. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the world smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. I walked to the window, watching the lights from the highway fade into the distance. Somewhere out there, Brady was running, but maybe not from me anymore. Maybe he was finally trying to make things right. As I closed the envelope, I felt Rowena's strength settle into my chest like an old heartbeat returning. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, I had the tools to weather it. The next morning, Rosa called again. Her voice carried a restrained kind of triumph. "Warrants are signed. We move on Helios tomorrow." And just like that, justice stopped being an idea and started becoming real. The morning of the raids began with the sound of rain against the motel roof. Soft at first, then sharp, like a drumbeat calling the day to attention. I was already awake when Rosa called. "It's happening," she said simply. "Stay inside and turn on the TV." I did as she asked. The screen flickered to a live news feed. Rows of black SUVs lined outside Helios Biotech's main campus, blue lights pulsing across wet asphalt. Agents in dark jackets poured through the glass doors while reporters shouted questions that dissolved into the storm. Boxes, hard drives, stacks of files, all carried out by hands that no longer belonged to men who lied for money. The caption at the bottom read, "Federal raid at Helios Biotech. Executives detained in fraud and homicide probe." Rita appeared at my door just minutes later, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She didn't speak. She just sat one beside me and watched the screen. When Derek Haynes emerged in handcuffs, flanked by agents, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "About time," she said. But the image that caught my breath wasn't Haynes. It was Brady. He was there too, standing beside Cass Price, both surrounded by federal officers. He wasn't in cuffs. Not yet. But his face told the story before the anchor did. Sources confirm internal whistleblowers and associated financial witnesses are cooperating with investigators. I pressed my fingers to my mouth. "He turned himself in," I whispered. Rita nodded. "Looks like he finally remembered who raised him." The coverage continued for hours. Footage of boxes being carried, reporters listing names I recognized from Rowena's files. Judge Conrad Hale, Registry Clerk Leslie Kemp, Elliot Granger. Each face another chapter of the deception that had stolen everything. But as I watched, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not vengeance, but a strange, deep quiet. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't shout, it breathes. By afternoon, Rosa arrived in person. Her coat was soaked, her expression calm but charged with energy. "It went clean," she said. "All warrants executed without resistance. We've secured records, payroll transfers, emails, everything. Haynes will face charges for fraud, conspiracy, and criminal negligence. Hale's office is under federal review." "And Brady?" I asked. "He's cooperating," she said carefully. "Cass, too. They've both entered preliminary plea discussions. He gave us the registry access codes, the ones that proved Hale's involvement. Without that, the case would have stalled." I looked down, my heart breaking in slow motion. So he helped after all. Yes, Rosa said. And he named every executive who approved the payouts. That's courage, Quinn, even if it came late. She sat with me for a while, going over the logistics, how the next steps would unfold, the court filings, the media storm that would follow. But her voice faded as I stared at the muted television screen. The camera panned across the Helios building, lights flickering like a wounded beast. It no longer looked powerful. It looked hollow. That evening, the story spread across every major network. The names of the victims began to surface. Families who'd lost loved ones to experimental drugs Helios had buried in legal silence. I recognized one name, Ana Ruiz, the woman Rowena once tried to help. Her photo flashed across the screen, holding a framed picture of her daughter. My throat tightened. Rita placed a hand on my shoulder. "You should be proud," she said. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of them." But pride wasn't what I felt. Just wait. The kind that comes when justice meets grief and neither one wins cleanly. The next day, reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Rosa insisted I stay hidden until the hearings began, but part of me wanted to see it for myself. I drove downtown just after dawn, parking far enough away that no one would notice me. From across the street, I watched the crowd. Cameras flashed, umbrellas collided, voices blurred together into a single restless hum. When Haynes was escorted in, shouts erupted. Questions, accusations, the sound of truth clawing its way into daylight. Then came Brady and Cass. They didn't look defiant. They looked human. Two people who had seen the cost of silence and couldn't bear it any longer. I thought about running up to him, about calling his name, but Rosa's words echoed in my head. He's cooperating. Let the truth speak for him now. So I stayed where I was, hands in my coat pockets, watching my son walk into the courthouse where my own life had been erased months before. This time, though, the gavel wouldn't fall against me. That night, the motel felt lighter. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp and clean. Martha Lee knocked on my door with a smile. "I saw you on TV," she said. "Didn't know my quiet neighbor was bringing down a corporation." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I didn't bring them down. I just turned on the light." We drank tea together in silence. Two women who had seen too much and survived anyway. The television in the background replayed footage of the raid over and over until it began to sound like background music. Before bed, I walked outside. The parking lot shimmered under the glow of the street lamp. Rita was standing near her truck, the window now replaced, wiping her hands with a rag. "They'll try to rebuild," she said when she saw me. "People like that always do, but the difference this time is they'll have to do it under watch." I nodded, looking up at the night sky. It was clear for the first time in weeks, stars visible even through the city haze. "Rowena used to say justice was just a form of remembering," I said. "That we fight not to punish, but so no one forgets." Rita smiled faintly. "Then you remembered well." Inside, I turned off the TV, closed my laptop, and sat quietly for a moment, listening to the hum of the motel sign outside. It flickered once, twice, then steadied, as if reminding me that light doesn't have to be perfect to be constant. Tomorrow would bring hearings, confessions, and headlines. But tonight, I allowed myself one small truth. I wasn't afraid anymore. The war Rowena started was ending, not with noise, but with resolve. And somewhere, I hope she was watching, proud, steady, finally at peace. By the time the trials began, winter had crept quietly over the city. The courthouse steps glistened from last night's frost, and the air carried the kind of stillness that only arrives before something irreversible. I sat in the gallery, hands folded tightly in my lap, while cameras clicked outside the doors. For months, the world had whispered about Helios Biotech, its fraud, its silence, its fall. But this morning, it was no longer whispers. It was reckoning. Derek Haynes entered first, flanked by his lawyers. He looked smaller than the man in the photographs. Pale, thin, eyes scanning the room as if trying to measure which truth might finally destroy him. Cass followed, escorted by federal marshals, her hair tied back, face calm in that way people look when they've already surrendered to what's coming. And then Brady. When he walked in, something in me broke. He was in a gray suit that hung loose on his frame, eyes sunken but alert. He glanced around the courtroom once and stopped when he found me. I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. I wanted him to know I was there, not as a mother forgiving, not yet, but as a witness who still believed in redemption. The prosecutor began with a calm that carried weight. He laid out the story piece by piece. Forged property transfers, illegal payouts, altered clinical data, buried deaths. Every exhibit was a wound reopened, every name a memory Rowena had fought to preserve. When Joel Winters took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. He spoke quietly, describing ledgers, offshore accounts, and how he had helped Rowena trace the money trail before she died. He explained how Judge Hale and the registry clerk had approved fraudulent filings in exchange for Helios's funds. His voice didn't shake once. Then came the moment Rosa had promised me, the introduction of Rowena's recordings. The courtroom dimmed slightly as the first tape played. Rowena's voice filled the room, clear and steady, describing how Helios manipulated court rulings, how their products had caused irreversible harm, and how she feared her time was running short. The judge, now a replacement for Hale, leaned forward, face grave. You could hear every breath in the room when Rowena said, "If this reaches court, it means I didn't live to testify. But the evidence does." People stared at the speaker as if listening to a ghost. I didn't move. I kept my hands in my lap, my locket pressed against my palm until the edges bit my skin. Then Cass Price testified. Her plea deal required honesty, and for the first time, she delivered it. She spoke about the fear, the bribery, the families Helios ruined, and when asked why she stayed silent, she said softly, "Because I thought silence would protect my child. I was wrong. It only protected them." Her words hung heavy in the room. Even Haynes looked down. Finally, it was Brady's turn. I had prepared myself for anger, for denial. But when he took the stand, what I saw instead was a man unburdening the weight of his own betrayal. His voice cracked as he described the debts, the blackmail, the moment he realized what Helios truly was. "I thought I could outsmart them," he said, eyes fixed on the table before him. "I thought I could keep my mother safe by doing what they asked. But I became the thing I feared, someone who let them take everything from her. If she can hear me now, I just want her to know I'm sorry." He didn't look at me as he said it, but the entire courtroom turned to see if I'd react. I didn't. Not yet. I just watched him, tears hot against my lashes, thinking of all the years between his first steps and this moment under oath. When the prosecution rested, Harper Cole took over to represent my civil claim. His voice was deliberate, every word measured like a nail in a coffin. He demanded restitution, not just for me, but for every victim Helios had silenced. He presented the Heritage Trust records, proving that Rowena's fund had been misused as a laundering route for corporate payoffs. The defense tried to fight, but each objection fell apart under the mountain of proof. Rosa's investigation, Joel's ledgers, Cass's testimony, Brady's confession. They fit together like a chain Rowena herself had forged from beyond the grave. After 6 weeks of proceedings, the verdict came down. Derek Haynes, guilty on all counts. Elliot Granger, guilty. Judge Conrad Hale, stripped of his title, indicted for corruption. Cass Price, convicted but granted leniency for cooperation. And Brady, guilty of conspiracy, but recommended for rehabilitation and conditional release due to cooperation and mitigating evidence. The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But in the center of it all, I sat in silence, watching as the gavel fell for the last time. Later, as people began to leave, Rosa found me by the exit. "It's done," she said softly. "Helios is finished. The restitution fund will cover victims, and your property, your home, is being returned under court order." I nodded slowly. Rowena would have liked that. She would have been proud, Rosa replied. I looked toward Brady as officers guided him toward a separate hallway. He glanced back, just once, and in that small moment, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Humility, not pride, not panic, just the fragile beginning of something like peace. Outside, the cold air met me like an embrace. Reporters swarmed, lights flashing, microphones raised. But I didn't answer their questions. I just kept walking, past the courthouse steps, down the block, until the noise faded behind me. When I reached my car, I finally let myself breathe. The weight I'd carried for months seemed to lift all at once, leaving behind something lighter, quieter. Justice hadn't restored what was lost, but it had made the loss mean something. And sometimes, that's the only kind of healing life allows. The day after the verdicts, the courthouse stood quiet again, stripped of cameras, emptied of noise. Justice had done its work. But the silence it left behind was heavier than I expected. Victory doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like the moment after a long storm, when the air is clear, but you're still shaking from the thunder. I woke early and brewed coffee in the same chipped kettle I'd carried since the motel days. The smell filled my small rented apartment, temporary, but mine. On the table lay a stack of papers Harper had dropped off the night before. The settlement terms, restitution awards, and a formal notice that the deed to my old home would be reinstated within 30 days. But I wasn't sure I wanted it back. Some doors, once closed, are better left sealed. Rita called that morning, her voice light for the first time in months. "I saw the news," she said. "Looks like the world finally caught up to the truth." I smiled faintly. "It took a lot of ghosts to get there." "Ghosts make good company," she said. "They remind us we were never really alone." Later that afternoon, Rosa visited, still in her pressed suit, though her face looked softer now. "We finalized the restitution fund," she told me. "Helios's assets will go to victims' families. Your share from the civil suit is significant, enough to rebuild 10 times over." I looked at her quietly. "And Brady?" She hesitated before answering. "He's been sentenced to 2 years under supervised release and mandatory rehabilitation. He'll serve part of it in a community program for corporate restitution. He's writing statements for the families affected by the trials. He asked if you'd read his letter." She handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in his hand. For a long moment, I just held it, feeling the weight of what it meant. "Thank you, Rosa," I said. When she left, I sat by the window and opened the letter. His handwriting trembled in places. The ink smudged where water, maybe tears, had touched it. "Mom," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. What I did broke something in both of us, but I'm trying to learn what it means to be the kind of man you believed I could be. I'm helping the investigators trace where the money went, and I've agreed to testify again for other cases. Cass has too. She wanted you to know she's sorry for everything. She said her daughter starts school next month, and she hopes someday you'll think of her as more than the woman who stood beside your son when he fell. I don't have much left to give, but I'm learning to start again. Maybe that's what you were teaching me all along. I love you, Mom. I always did, even when I forgot how to show it." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the same box that once held Rowena's tapes, and let the silence settle around me. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was close. A week later, I met Rosa and Harper at a community center where restitution funds were being distributed to families. The room was full of quiet reunions and fragile gratitude. People holding photos, clutching documents, whispering names of those they'd lost. Among them was Ana Ruiz. I recognized her immediately from the photos, her daughter's smile framed in the picture she held. When she saw me, she hesitated, then approached. "You're Mrs. Avery," she said softly. "I am." She took my hand. "My daughter was part of the Helios trial. We never got an apology from them. Not once. But what you did, it gave her back a voice. I wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment. But all I managed was, 'I'm sorry it took this long.'" She smiled through tears. Late truth is better than none. Before leaving, I handed her a small envelope with a check inside, the first donation from the restitution portion I'd received. "This isn't from me," I said. "It's from Rowena, and from everyone who didn't get the chance to see today." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, the courtroom, the betrayal, the loss, it all felt like it had been leading to this quiet act of repair. That evening, I returned to the Blue Lantern Inn one last time. The old sign still flickered in the dusk, the paint more faded now, but the light still steady. Rita met me outside with her usual half-smile. "Room 7's still yours," she said. "Not this time," I replied. "I think it's time I let someone else have it." We walked together to the office, where I placed a small brass key on the counter. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I'm starting something," I said. "A foundation, the Rowena Initiative. It'll help whistleblowers, families, people who get swallowed by systems too big to fight alone. If justice took this long for me, maybe it'll come quicker for someone else." Rita nodded approvingly. That sounds like something she'd be proud of. As I turned to leave, she called out, "Quinn?" "Yes." "She'd say you did finish what she started." The words followed me out into the night. I drove to the coast the next morning, where the ocean met the gray horizon like it had been waiting for me. I stood barefoot on the sand, the wind tangling my hair, the sound of waves loud enough to drown the past. I opened the locket and let the tiny slip of Rowena's handwriting fall into the water. It didn't sink right away. It floated, catching the sunlight for a brief second before disappearing beneath the surface. As the tide moved in, I whispered to the wind, "It's done." And for the first time in years, I believed it. A year passed before I realized how much life had changed since that morning at the Blue Lantern Inn. The motel still stood, its neon sign humming faintly over the highway, but my days no longer began there. Now, I woke in a small office that overlooked the ocean, sunlight spilling across papers and photos that filled the walls. Not of loss, but of survival. The Rowena initiative had grown faster than I imagined. What started as a promise written on a napkin became a network of lawyers, advocates, and volunteers helping whistleblowers and victims find justice. The first grant we funded reopened a pharmaceutical case in Arizona. The second supported a small-town teacher who exposed municipal fraud. Every success felt like another whisper of Rowena's voice saying, "Keep going." Sometimes I caught myself talking to her picture, the one that now hung above my desk. "You were right about truth," I'd say. "It doesn't move fast, but it never dies." Rosa still visited often, her hair now streaked with silver, her tone softer. She'd bring updates, new cases, fresh battles, and every time she ended with the same quiet line. "It's working, Quinn. You're making it work." Harper stayed involved too, guiding the foundation's legal side with his steady hand and quiet wit. Joel lectured at universities now, using the Helios case as a lesson in ethics. Even Cass sent postcards sometimes. From her daughter's school recitals, from the small apartment she'd rebuilt her life in, each one ended with the same 3 words. "Still trying, still grateful." And Brady? He finished his sentence, then asked to volunteer at the initiative. Rosa called to ask if I was comfortable with it. I said yes. When he walked through the office door for the first time, he didn't say anything. He just hugged me. A real hug, the kind that says everything words can't. We didn't erase the past. We learned to live with it. Now he helps manage the financial integrity team, ensuring every dollar is transparent, every case accountable. He works quietly, no credit taken, no spotlight. But every so often, when he leaves my office at night, he'll stop at the framed quote on the wall. Rowena's words. "Truth costs less than silence does." He touches the frame like it's a promise. Rita, ever the silent guardian, became our property manager after the initiative bought the Blue Lantern building for restoration. The old motel is now a safe house, a temporary refuge for whistleblowers under protection. She still waters the dusty plants by the door, still writes names in her little spiral notebook. When I teased her about it, she just smiled. "It's good to keep track of the ones who make it out," she said. One evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the office watching the sunset fade into the ocean. Papers rustled softly in the warm breeze. On the desk lay an old motel receipt from room 7, the one I'd kept all this time. It reminded me that sometimes the smallest places hold the beginnings of the largest truths. A soft knock came at the door. It was Rita. She didn't speak, just stepped inside and placed something on the desk. A neatly folded scarf. I recognized it immediately. Rowena's, pale blue with faded thread at the edges. "Thought it should come home," she said. As she turned to leave, I noticed a small envelope tucked beneath the scarf. My name written in Rowena's familiar handwriting. My breath caught as I opened it, hands trembling like they had the first day I found the envelope at the motel. Inside was a single note, just a few words long, for when you need to remember why. There was no money, no key, no grand revelation. Just that one line, written years ago by a woman who somehow knew that memory, not victory, was what would keep me moving. I sat there for a long time, the note between my fingers, the light from the window spilling across the desk. Outside, I could hear the faint hum of the ocean and the sound of footsteps fading down the hallway. Then I smiled, quietly, like she used to. The next morning, I framed the note and hung it beside the quote about truth. Together they formed the heart of the initiative, 2 small sentences that had carried me through ruin, betrayal, and back into grace. Before leaving for the day, I locked the office, stepped outside, and stood for a moment in the salt air. The sea stretched endlessly before me, calm and endless, the same way it had looked the morning I let the slip of paper drift away. Somewhere beneath those waves lay all the things I had lost: fear, anger, silence. What remained was something Rowena had always wanted for me: peace that didn't need permission. As I walked down the path toward the parking lot, a young volunteer passed me, holding a box of documents for a new case. She stopped and smiled shyly. "Mrs. Avery," she said, "why do you still do all this? After everything?" I looked at her, at the late sunlight catching the gold strands of her hair, and felt Rowena's words rise inside me like a tide. "Because quiet justice," I said softly, "is still justice, and sometimes it's the only kind that lasts." The wind carried the sound away, folding it into the hush of the ocean. I didn't chase it. Some words are meant to drift, to find whoever needs them next. And as I drove home, the scarf folded on the passenger seat, the city lights fading behind me, I knew one truth more clearly than ever. Rowena's story had ended long ago. But mine, somehow, had just begun.